So how do you feel if someone got you a Bible this Christmas? If that's your thing, you'd probably be really happy. But if it's not, you're probably going to feel that they care a lot more about the message than about making you happy. Which is why I want to talk about the Black Christmas remake. Blumhouse Productions makes its fortune pumping out cheap, low-budget horror movies to a hungry audience. This is the classic horror model. Low budget, high profit. It's an absolute staple of the industry. This year they are pumping out a remake of Black Christmas, the 1974 cult classic, which was already remade in 2006. Now this has an inbuilt audience in it from fans of the original, and they're also hoping to get a little bit of that Christmas market, but they failed miserably, and I'm going to tell you why. So, as is obvious from the trailer, this is not the Black Christmas that we know and love. This is Black Christmas in name only. It's abundantly clear from the contents of the trailer, which also seem to be the plot points for the entire movie, that the whole plot has been changed. This is no longer about a stalker, killer, harasser on campus who's haunting a sorority, but is about, well, it's the patriarchy again. The film is explicitly an intersectional feminist film, not just from the trailer, but from the press about the film. And that's the first problem, is that for people who loved the original, seeing that they have taken the name of the film but changed the contents completely to push exclusively one message, that already starts to strike people as a bit cynical. When I saw that, I was already thinking, this is not for me.
My issue with this film isn't because of what it is. I think it's really great to highlight social issues in horror movies, and it's what horror movies have always been doing, even if you don't realize it. And that's the key point here, is that this film shoves things so down your throat that it makes it very uncomfortable to watch, and it's not doing anything, it's not teaching any lessons, it's just an attack on your senses, and not a good one.
Now, as I've said, the trailer made it explicitly clear that this is a feminist film. Not a film with feminist themes, but a feminist film. So I don't actually want to talk politics on this channel, but when this film is so explicitly political, it's kind of hard for me to engage with it without discussing the nature of politics. And I want to draw a distinction here. You can have a film which has got a whole rich load of themes that isn't explicitly ideological. It's not a lecture. So, for example, a film can have a lot of varied content and viewpoints, but not explicitly force one side. So an example of this is that I can look at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a vegan horror film, or rather a horror film with a vegan message. Others have looked at It Follows as a film about the problems of an abusive and coercive sexual culture. It's not the only way you can look at that movie, but it is interesting to look at that film with that lens. Because the thing is, the film allows for a whole bunch of viewpoints and interpretations, and that's what makes it really interesting. You know, you can enjoy A Nightmare on Elm Street on its own, but it can be richer when you look at it and see it as a parallel to generational conflict over the Vietnam War. What? You've watched my videos, you know I'm going to be a pretentious asshole. What are you expecting? Come on. Now, an ideological film is different because the film is not a story and characters that are bolstered by themes. An ideological film is an ideological message which is puppeting a story and characters in order to deliver that message, and the story and characters end up weaker because of that.
And it is overall very much men versus women, which sucks. It absolutely sucks.
And the problem you get is that unless you are already really on board with that message, it's going to turn you off. Because it isn't about exploring a topic, it's about pushing one point of view. It is going to alienate anyone who isn't already convinced. The only way it's going to get an audience that isn't already on board with the message is when when they come back and view it ironically. The classic example of that is Reefer Madness, which was made to warn about the dangers of the devil's lettuce, but is now essentially viewed as like a corny failure, and it's used to mock its original message. So given the difference between a film with themes and an ideological film, you can see exactly why Black Christmas 2019 was doomed to fail, and frankly kind of deserved to fail. Let's look at two parallel examples. There have been a number of attempts to make films based on the works of Ayn Rand. There is a Fountainhead movie, and there was a recent attempt to film Atlas Shrugs over 3 parts. The number of objectivists, that is people who enjoy Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism, is very small, and this was actually reflected in the fact that the first part of Atlas Shrugged had a much bigger budget and a much more well-known cast, including Taylor Schilling, who would later go on to be the face of Orange is the New Black. Do never let her forget this. Whereas the subsequent parts had a smaller budget and a less known cast because there was not a general audience for this movie. They did not want a lecture on objectivism. Another good example would be evangelical Christian movies. There is a small but dedicated audience, but these films are not popular with people who aren't evangelical Christians. These films don't even get released to general audiences most of the time, even though it would be great to see Dean Cain on again. He's always going to be my Superman. And that discussion of objectivists and evangelical Christians brings us to the issue that woke feminist films have, because their message is not one that's accessible or enjoyable for a wide audience. You know, outside of Twitter, there really are not a lot of people who are very strong proponents of social justice, and it is very easy to forget this. The Hidden Tribes research found that only 8% of Americans identify as social justice proponents, and similarly in Britain, the UK Fawcett Society, which is a feminist organisation, ran a poll finding that only 8% of British people overall identify as feminists. That's 9% of women identified as feminist and 7% of men. However, the same research found that 80% of the populace supported equal rights for men and women, which is a lot more heartening. And there is probably going to be an objection to this video on precisely that point, that, well, those 80% of the population, they are feminists because they support equal rights for men and women. And come on, that's a lie, and it is completely disingenuous. It is insulting to feminism and feminists, in my view, to say that feminism is just about equal rights for men and women. It is a much more developed, nuanced and multifaceted philosophy and ideology than that. There are all these substrains and subsections within feminism, you know, that are often at war with each other, because feminism is not one thing. It is not this very simple principle. You would not be filling shelves and shelves of books and hundreds of academic courses if feminism was just be excellent to one another. Come on. Don't be disingenuous. So when we're saying it's a feminist film, we are not just saying it's a film that has a respectful view of both genders. We're talking about a film that is explicitly fourth wave, intersectional, race conscious, queer conscious, etc. feminism. And that is a very specific ideology or philosophy. And again, the problem is that that is a vanishingly small proportion of any population. And when the film is only accessible to people in that tiny population because it is utterly uncompromising in the viewpoint that it is frankly lecturing the audience on, then of course the film is going to flop.
Throwing out everything, and they're just stirring up everybody. Like, it's just a huge, this movie's gonna piss people off. It's just there to stir people up, and it's not really proving any point.
We've already seen the very public box office failures of the all-female Ghostbusters reboot, Terminator Dark Fate, Charlie's Angels, and Halloween 2018, which was utterly awful. So if I want to make a comedy film, I am not going to be successful if it's filled with very specific economics jokes, such as, why do you passive investors get through so many books? 'Cause I only bother with the index. Yeah, congratulations to the 6 people who got that joke. It's not going to work for a major audience. Studios need to realize this and stop trying to make these woke reboots. No one wants to see them. And that's not to say a film can't have feminist themes. It just has to be an actual film and not a lecture or a homily. So the obvious question is, what should you do instead of watching Black Christmas 2019? And literally anything is probably not a great answer. So let's be specific. Let's consider horror films that would work for a feminist audience, and by that I mean they are female-centric and they have well-rounded characters. And the thing is, there are tons of these because horror has always been fairly female-centric, but to just pick a few, The Descent really stands out, as does the original Craft, Hostel 2, Carrie, the original only please, no remakes, Scream, The Witch, It Follows, Alien, and for more modern films, I have to point out the work of Mike Flanagan. He's been doing amazing stuff, and Hush, The Haunting of Hill House, and of course Gerald's Game really work for this. They definitely fit that mold. But there's a final recommendation that's absolutely obvious. The original Black Christmas. It is a great early entry in the slasher canon. It has some great performances by Olivia Hussey and horror veteran John Saxon, and some very fun subversive comedy elements to it. It has an unsettling ending and is a bit more complex than you probably expect from it. So I guess that's probably my number one recommendation. Throw £3 towards renting the original Black Christmas 1974, and do not throw studios money for these crappy woke remakes that no one wants to see. Hopefully then studios will get the message and make something that all audiences can enjoy. I was actually working on another video on Christmas horror films, but when I saw the trailer for Black Christmas, I thought, okay, I have got to do something on this. Hence this very quick video. My other video on Christmas horror should be coming out soon. In the meantime, it would be really great to hear your thoughts on this. Maybe you are really keen on woke remakes. There's got to be someone out there who is. So please share below, and please drop a like on this video if this was your sort of thing, and thank you for watching. Take it easy.
Durango 95 purred away real horror show.